Jim, great to have you on the show. Thanks very much for taking out the time. I remember speaking to you in November last year, and you were talking about how this would be a crucial year for India, given the election event. Now that the event is out of the way, what do you expect the markets to do? We've already seen a 15% rally for the Indian market so far into the year.
Well, that's you say only, that's quite a big rally given what's happened elsewhere. India is now one of the top performing equity markets of the year. It's along with Indonesia, the strongest of the BRIC, and what I call the next 11 markets is easily the strongest of the BRIC markets. So it's had a big move, most of it coming in the last 4 or 5 weeks ahead of the election. But I think it's justifiable, linked to what we discussed last November. The excitement about possible Modi victory was understandable, and now the size of the victory is as big as it is. In my opinion, it's possibly the most important policy news for India in a few decades. You Indians are proud and often saying you're the world's biggest democracy, but frequently it's always so complex it can never function. But with this size of majority, you have the chance of the Indian government being able to operate more effectively about every aspect of its desires, and especially as it relates to economic policy reform. I think this is a very exciting and potentially really positive moment in India's history.
Jim, you've had personal interactions with Mr. Modi in the past. You visited Gujarat as well. Give us a sense on what his leadership could mean for the market from here. I know 15% is a lot year to date, but how much more can the market go higher from here? There's already talk about comparing this event to being the kind of trigger that could take the Indian market into the kind of secular bull run that the US witnessed between 1987 to 2000.
Depends on what he does the next few weeks. That obviously, given the size of the rally, there is some scope. There is some scope for disappointment if, as we often see around the world, it's one thing for politicians to talk ahead of an election, but the big difference is always between talking the talk and walking the walk, so to speak. I have met Modi and talked a lot about economic policy with him and his team. They encourage me to think in terms of a big piece I wrote many years ago about 10 things India needs to do to reach its potential. I developed the impression that they would focus on a lot of those issues. And if they do, I think India will be significantly re-rated by investors inside India, as well as obviously around the world. So it's a really important moment. And whether it be macroeconomic policy, making the central bank truly independent, having a proper fiscal policy framework, allowing more foreign direct investment, and linked to all of those and more, sticking to this great mantra of his, of MG squared, which is maximum governance and minimum government. Because I think if that were to be applied, it would be a breath of fresh air to India and people that want to do business there. So it's a really exciting moment. The one caveat I would add is obviously given some of the issues about religion, it wouldn't be a crazy idea for him to get on a plane and go and visit his new policy friends in Pakistan to make sure that relationships become stronger there, because otherwise I think it looks a very positive environment now.
But from a market perspective, Jim, since you can correlate markets, politics, and what economic policies to what the market does as well, do you think that the Indian market is in a secular bull run, one that can last for over a decade plus?
Well, as I say, I think I'm a lot more open to that possibility than I was 6 months ago. even though I thought the Indian market would rally. But this size of majority gives the potential for such an outcome. If Modi were to implement just a fraction of the things that I talked about in that paper, you will have the consensus economists revising their forecast for the second half of this decade to 7, 8, maybe even higher percentage than that economic growth. And that would give a secular bull market. But investors aren't gonna price all of that in until they see evidence of Modi delivering the framework to do some of these things. You know, this time a year ago, people were panicking about India a little bit. So we've come a very positive way since then. But investors aren't completely, they're sometimes pretty crazy, but not completely crazy. So they want to see some evidence that this talk is going to be translated into some action. But I am quite hopeful, yeah.
Jim, now my question is, a lot of people that we spoke to over the last 7 days say that the things to buy in India, or things to buy when a bull market is picking up in a country which has been through 4 or 5 years of going nowhere, are the ones which haven't performed till now, and where, if the economic cycle improves, earnings can pick up. So people are lapping up stocks and sectors which haven't done well at all, or which are not doing well but have the potential to do that. Is that the right way to approach, or you would differ on that?
I can see why people are doing that, but I guess they will probably have to also become a little bit more thoughtful, because obviously the biggest beneficiaries by sector will end up being the ones that benefit most from the specific reforms. But it may relate to exactly those that have underperformed so much the past few years. But if they go down the path that I would be hopeful for, I think the whole Indian market could get re-rated, as could India as a nation. So the currency, you know, the central bank might find itself with a new problem of trying to stop the rupee rising too much.
Yeah, and that was your call as well in November last year. You know, pretty much said that if things are put in place, and it doesn't take a lot to do that, especially on the macro variables, then the currency could actually go up to 55. We're at 58, 59 roughly on the rupee dollar. Do you think that 55 is, you know, you would perhaps want to revise that target a bit higher now, given the momentum we've seen? It's one of the best performing currencies in EMs.
When you tell me that, I'm so annoyed. I actually got the private banking guy that covers me to price up a rupee call option, and I never bought it. I'm so mad at myself. I would have made a lot of money. But I'm not sure it would go much more than 55, because I think at that stage, the central bank, if not before, could start reducing interest rates, because it would help bring down inflation. And of course, India wants to have some competitiveness, even though the decline in the rupee had some negative aspects to it. It obviously makes it a bit easier for India to compete with other places in the world. So you don't want the rupee to rise too much. So, but you know, obviously I'll be watching it closely. Luckily, I don't have to make such forecasts as a regular habit these days. But 55 seemed like a possible recovery target to me last November, and obviously now it still seems pretty feasible.